The debt comes due. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Terran fleet ship, reckoning her form. A still point in a storm of quiet activity. Before her, the main hololith displayed the Viridian system, a serene jewel of blue-green worlds held hostage. And crimson overlay pulsed around the primary planet, the indelible stain of the Groll hegemony blockade. They were a force of brutal simplicity, their ships built like armored fists, their doctrine carved from granite. Rostova's 9th Expeditionary Fleet was smaller, a collection of silver scalpels against a fleet of hammers. The stakes were 30 million souls on Viridian Prime, caught between hegemony pride and human resolve. A timer in the corner of the display bled seconds away with cold digital precision. 58:12. They are holding their formation. Admiral Commander Kai Jax reported, his voice tight with restrained energy. Textbook siege posture. Overlord. Kalen is confident we won't engage. Rostova's gaze remained fixed on the enemy fleet. He is confident we will engage precisely as he predicts. He has read our history, our public doctrines on de-escalation. She turned her head slightly, her reflection a faint ghost in the hololith's glare. Lyceum, what has he missed? The synthesized voice of the fleet mind, calm and resonant, filled the air from unseen emitters. Overlord Kalen's profile suggests a cognitive reliance on historical precedent. He has not previously encountered a human fleet commander who has studied Groll philosophy. His tactical models assume a symmetrical response, a list of probabilities scrolled beside the timer, each outlining a path to violence. Lyceum's preferred solution, a decapitation strike on the Groll flagship, glowed with a 78.4% chance of success. Rostova ignored it. She knew the AI's calculus was flawless, but it was a calculus of wreckage and body counts. It could not compute the value of a lesson taught only a victory won. That was her domain. We are here to teach. Down on Viridian Prime, a young girl named Alara tugged on her father's sleeve, pointing a small finger at the night sky. New unblinking stars had appeared this week, sharp and menacing. Are the good stars here yet, Papa? She asked, her voice a tiny whisper against the low hum of the city's defensive shields. Her father knelt, pulling her close. They are, little bird, he said, forcing a warmth he didn't feel. They're just being quiet, getting ready to show the bullies how to share the sky. He prayed he was right. The public news feeds showed the silent human ships and the ever-present, ever-dwindling hegemony clock. Communications. Rostova said, her voice cutting through the bridge's low hum. Sub-Commander Sharma, any unusual energy readings from their flanks? Anything that doesn't fit a standard blockade pattern? Anya. Sharma leaned over her console, her fingers dancing across the interface. The reflected light cast intricate shadows on her focused face. Negative on standard emissions, Admiral. But there are intermittent low-power signatures on the periphery. They're masked as sensor ghosts, but the frequency is too stable. It's deliberate. Jax scoffed lightly. Decoys? They're wasting power. The Groll don't waste power, Rostova countered softly. They invest it. This was the first mystery, the first thread to pull. A Groll fleet that prided itself on overwhelming force was playing games in the static. It was a deviation from their doctrine a tell. The enemy always tells you how they will break. Lyceum's voice returned a hint of digital curiosity in its tone. The energy profile is inconsistent with known Groll decoy technology. It is inefficient. I am running a deep archive analysis. The AI was intrigued, and an intrigued Lyceum was a powerful weapon. Rostova allowed herself a small internal smile. The first lesson was about to begin. The board was being set. Not for a battle, but for a reckoning. The Groll had presented their ultimatum. Now they would receive the accounting. A priority communique flashed on Sharma's console. Admiral, it's Governor Thorne from Viridian Prime. He's broadcasting on the emergency channel. The colony's primary medical isotope reserves are critical. They have a convoy of 5 unarmed freighters waiting just outside the system. Sharma's expression tightened. The Groll have broadcast their own message system-wide. Any attempt to run the blockade will be considered an act of aggression. They will destroy the convoy and cut the ultimatum timer by half. Jax's knuckles whitened where he gripped his console rail. It's a chokehold. They're daring us to sacrifice civilians to save civilians. They are forcing a choice, Rostova corrected. They believe our only options are to retreat in shame or attack in fury. They want to frame our response. The cold logic of the Groll was a cage, and they were trying to shove humanity inside it. But the cage had bars, and bars have gaps. The cage is an illusion. Lyceum cross-reference. Sharma's flank signatures with Groll gravitic manipulation technology. Rostova ordered a new strategy beginning to coalesce. Ignore offensive applications. Search for containment or herding patterns. The AI processed the command in silence for 3.2 seconds. Then a new schematic overlaid the hololith. The faint signatures Sharma had detected were revealed as the source points for a vast invisible web of low-intensity gravity wells. They weren't mines meant to destroy. They were gravitic fences designed to funnel any approaching force into a pre-selected kill box. The Groll weren't just waiting for an attack. They were shaping it. They've laid a trap. Jax breathed his earlier aggression evaporating into cold realization. A very clever one, Rostova conceded. One that relies on us being predictable. She turned to Sharma. Anya, I need a new kind of ghost. Not a warship, but a phenomenon. Can you project a cascade of false energy readings on the far side of the system? Make it look like a fleet-sized jump drive malfunction, something chaotic and massive. Sharma's eyes lit with understanding. A distraction of sufficient scale to draw their primary sensor arrays. Yes, Admiral. It will strain our emitters, but it's possible. Rostova then looked towards the tactical plot, and while they're looking the other way, she continued. Her voice dropping, we will create our own corridor. She outlined the plan. A series of specialized drones would deploy between the human fleet and the convoy's entry point. They wouldn't jam or fight. They would simply create a shimmering sensor-refractive tunnel, a mirror lattice. The path you cannot see is the safest. Lyceum interjected its synthesized voice, a perfect monotone of dissent. Admiral, this strategy carries a 31.6% risk of catastrophic failure. A single misaligned drone could expose the convoy. The Groll response would be immediate. A direct surgical strike on their command ship remains the more statistically favorable option. Your statistics measure the cost of failure, Lyceum. They don't measure the value of success on our terms. Rostova replied, her tone unwavering. We aren't here to bloody their nose. We are here to show them their doctrine is a liability. We will teach them that an ultimatum has 2 edges. She held the AI's silence for a moment. We proceed with the deception. Teach them about mirrors. The order was given. On the bridge of the reckoning, the hum of the ship's systems deepened as power was rerouted to the massive electronic warfare suite. The air grew warmer, carrying the faint, clean scent of ionized particles. Rostova could feel the vibration through the soles of her boots, a deep thrum of immense energy being carefully, precisely wielded. The convoy was vulnerable. The Groll were poised, and 30 million lives were held. In the balance of this fragile, calculated gambit. Hold the line. Hold the light. The civilian crew aboard the freighter Starlight Drift held their collective breath. Their captain, a veteran of 100 trade routes, watched his screen as the human fleet began its strange ballet. He saw no weapon ports open, no engines flare for an attack run. Instead, he saw the distant, silent bloom of a dozen small drones flying in a formation that made no tactical sense. Then the space between them began to warp, not with gravity, but with light itself. A shimmering corridor of nothingness formed before them, a tunnel carved through the enemy's watchful gaze. An instruction from the human stealth escort. The TFS whisper appeared on his screen. Starlight Drift. You are cleared for passage. Maintain current velocity. Do not deviate. We will light the way. The Ghost Fleet bloomed into terrifying life on the Groll's tactical displays. A maelstrom of energy signatures erupted 500,000 kilometers off their port flank. It looked like the catastrophic arrival of a massive, uncoordinated armada, drives failing reactors. Flaring. Overlord Kalen's bridge was thrown into chaos. His sensor officers screamed reports of dozens, then hundreds of contacts all appearing in a chaotic jumble. Panic was a spark in a dry forest. Report. What is this? Kalen bellowed, his heavy form rigid with shock and fury. Is this the main human fleet? The signatures are unstable. Overlord, his tactical officer stammered. They read as capital ships, but their energy output is erratic. It could be a failed jump or a new human weapon. Kalen's eyes narrowed. It felt wrong, too chaotic for the human's disciplined reputation. Yet the threat was too immense to ignore. Reorient our primary sensor arrays. Target that anomaly. I want every weapon locked and ready, he commanded. As the Groll fleet turned its attention to the Phantom Menace, a new path opened in the darkness. The greatest deception is a target too perfect to ignore. Aboard the Reckoning, Sharma's station was a cocoon of light. The Groll are taking the bait, Admiral. Main sensor arrays are shifting focus. The corridor is clean. Launch the lattice drones, Rostova ordered. Her command was a ripple, and the fleet responded instantly. The small specialized drones accelerated their emitters, activating in perfect synchronization. Space itself seemed to fold the light from distant stars, bending around a newly defined, invisible pathway. The convoy, escorted by the single frigate Whisper, began its silent journey into the mirrored passage. It was a nerve-wracking transit, a slow crawl through a tunnel of pure physics. Everything depended on the fragile alignment of the drones. For several minutes, the only sounds on Rostova's bridge were the soft chimes of system status updates and the steady breathing of her crew. Jax stood like a statue, his eyes glued to the display, showing the convoy's progress. The small green icons representing the freighters crept steadily across the tactical map, moving through the gap in the Groll's sensor net. They were halfway through. The silence was heavy with unspoken hope. Then a jarring alert cut through the calm. Energy fluctuation in the lattice. Sharma called out, her voice sharp. Drone 7 is reporting a cascade failure in its primary emitter. On the main screen, a section of the mirrored corridor flickered, threatening to collapse. A single Groll picket ship left on patrol registered the momentary anomaly. Its weapon ports glowed hot. A lattice that bends can also break. The Groll ship fired a volley of plasma torpedoes. They weren't aimed at the convoy, which it still couldn't see, but at the source of the strange energy reading. On the Whisper's bridge, its commander reacted instantly. Evasive maneuvers, deploy countermeasures. The stealth frigate surged forward, releasing a cloud of sensor decoys. Most of the torpedoes were drawn away, detonating harmlessly in empty space. But one its guidance system confused, clipped the rearmost freighter the Starlight Drift. A brief, silent flare of orange light marked the impact. On the reckoning, damage reports flooded in. "Shields held, but the freighter's port cargo bay is compromised," Jax reported, reading the telemetry. "Hull integrity is failing. Life support is stable. They have one injury, a crewman with minor plasma burns from a ruptured conduit." Rostova's jaw tightened. A cost. There was always a cost. She filed it away, a debt to be settled later. But the frigate's quick action and the drone's emergency reboot stabilized the corridor. The Groll picket, seeing its shots miss and the anomaly vanish, reported it as a sensor ghost and returned to its station. The moment of danger had passed. The 5 freighters cleared the blockade zone, accelerating toward Viridian Prime under the Whisper's watchful eye. They were through. The mission was a success. The mirror holds. A wave of palpable relief washed over the Reckoning's bridge. Subcommander Sharma let out a long, slow breath. Jax allowed a grim smile. "They did it, Admiral. The isotopes are going to make it." Rostova simply nodded, her gaze already shifting back to the Groll fleet. The first lesson was complete. They had shown the Groll that their blockade was permeable, that their senses could be deceived. They had delivered aid without firing a shot from the main fleet, a direct refutation of the Groll's binary thinking. Now she waited for the response. It did not take long. A system-wide broadcast, raw and furious, erupted from the Groll flagship, Overlord. Kalen's face appeared on the main screen, his features a mask of rage. "You hide behind tricks and shadows, humans. You flaunt your cowardice. For this insult, the terms have changed." The ultimatum clock on the screen flashed, the numbers rolling back with sickening speed. "Your time is halved. Face us in honorable combat, or Viridian will pay the price for your dishonor." The proud enemy's rage is his greatest weakness. Beat escalation number 2 had arrived precisely on schedule. Kalen, publicly humiliated, had abandoned all pretense of strategy for pure vindictive pride. His fleet began to move, reconfiguring from a wide blockade into a compressed aggressive formation. A single wide corridor opened in their lines, leading directly toward his flagship, the Indomitable Will. It was a blatant invitation, a dare. "He's offering us a kill box," Jax stated, the excitement back in his voice. "He's concentrating his fleet's firepower into a single lane. It's a trap, but it's also an opportunity. A concentrated push could break his command structure." "He wants us to make that push, Kai," Rostova said calmly. "He needs a glorious battle to erase the shame of being outmaneuvered. He is trying to force us back onto his terms, a contest of brute force." She traced a finger over the hololith, outlining the open corridor. "He expects us to see this as a path to his ship, but he's forgotten the first rule of strategy." She paused, letting the crew hang on the words. "Never fight on the ground your enemy has prepared for you." A new alert chimed from Sharma's station. She had been working quietly, running Lyceum's deep archive analysis on Groll communication protocols. "Admiral, I have something. Lyceum and I decrypted a secondary data layer in the Groll's low-level comms. It's not military code. It's a real-time honor ledger." She brought it up on the main screen. It was a complex tally system tracking weapon deployments, ship positions, and tactical challenges. "He's broadcasting a public record of the battle for his people back home. He's not just fighting us. He's performing." There it was. The second mystery revealed. Kalen wasn't just an overlord. He was a politician playing to an audience. He needed a victory that was not just total, but spectacular. This changed everything. His need for a public triumph was a vulnerability far greater than any gap in his shields. "We will use his stage to set our own. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." Rostova murmured a core tenet of her command philosophy. The Groll used their ledger for glory. She would use it for education. Lyceum, Rostova commanded, her voice now imbued with a new, harder edge. Analyze the power distribution required for Kalen to maintain that killbox formation. Pinpoint the stress points and energy fluctuations across his fleet. She turned to Jax. Commander, prepare a vanguard group. You will take the bait. You will proceed down that corridor, as if you intend to strike the heart of their fleet. Jax's eyes widened. A protest already forming on his lips, but Rostova raised a hand. You are the lure, Commander. Your objective is not to engage, but to draw their fire. You will make them commit. To Sharma, she said, Anya, I want you to piggyback our own data stream onto their honor ledger. When they power their weapons to fire on Commander Jax, I want every citizen in the Groll hegemony to see exactly how we answer. The plan was audacious. It was a trap turned inside out. They would not destroy the Groll fleet. They would disarm it using its own power against it, and broadcast the humiliation on the very channel Kalen was using to project his strength. The ledger would be balanced not with blood, but with truth. The debt is not paid in blood, but in truth. On Viridian Prime, news of the convoy's arrival had spread like wildfire. A local journalist stood near the bustling spaceport reporting live as shielded containers of isotopes were unloaded under the watchful eyes of colonial defense forces. Hope has a tangible form today, she said to her camera, her voice thick with emotion. For the first time in weeks, the hegemony's clock seems less like a death sentence and more like a challenge. The human fleet has proven that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it shines a light in the dark. The dock worker she interviewed simply wiped sweat from his brow and said, They gave our doctors the tools they need. Now our people have a chance. That's all we ever wanted. Back on the reckoning, the board was set for the second act. Jax's vanguard, a squadron of swift destroyers and heavy cruisers, peeled away from the main fleet. They formed a tight arrowhead formation, engines burning hot, as they accelerated towards the Groll's open invitation. It was a picture-perfect image of a classic naval assault. Kalen would be watching his pride swelling his finger, hovering over the button that would spring his trap. Lyceum's voice filled the bridge once more, its calculations now focused on the new audacious plan. The Groll are rerouting auxiliary power to their forward weapon batteries. It is creating a cascade of minute energy instabilities in their shield modulation. As predicted, their system is creating harmonic resonance points. These are exploitable weaknesses, Admiral. They are more than weaknesses, Lyceum, Rostova corrected. They are opportunities for instruction. She watched Jax's ships, now small silver darts, closing the distance. The console beside her showed the Groll's honor ledger, a stream of arrogant, self-aggrandizing data. Soon that stream would carry a very different message. It would show a fleet not defeated by overwhelming firepower, but undone by its own rigid doctrine. The tension on the bridge was a physical presence. Every officer was at their station, every eye on the unfolding drama. Jax's ships crossed the invisible line, entering the Groll's designated kill box. Immediately, the space around them lit up as dozens of Groll warships powered their main cannons. Energy readings spiked across the board. The trap was sprung. The air on the Reckoning's bridge crackled with ozone from the sheer power being drawn by Sharma's EW suite, ready to unleash its invisible storm. The moment hung, stretched thin, a breath held before the plunge. Rostova's expression was serene, her resolve absolute. She had given the Groll a chance to learn through subtlety. Now she would teach them through public failure. Her hand rested on the command interface, the ship thrumming beneath her palm, like a living thing waiting for the word. The Groll weapons reached peak charge, ready to unleash hell. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried the weight of the entire fleet. Lyceum, open the ledger. The reckoning begins. The instant Rostova gave the command, the battle became a silent storm of light and data. Sub-Commander Sharma's fingers flew across her console, unleashing a precisely modulated cascade of energy pulses. It wasn't a weaponized beam or a jamming field. It was a targeted resonance attack, a whisper of code carried on a wave of pure energy. It slipped through the Groll shields and struck their power conduits at the exact moment of their peak charge, turning their greatest strength into their most spectacular failure. Across the Groll, fleet ship after ship convulsed. Their forward cannons, glowing with the promise of annihilation, sputtered and died. Emergency lights flickered across their armored hulls as their own energy denied its release, fed back into their systems. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. Power grids overloaded, plunging entire sections of warships into darkness. It was a system-wide induced seizure, elegant and devastatingly effective, and every moment of it was captured and broadcast on Kalen's own honor ledger. Where his audience expected to see glorious explosions and human ships turned to slag, they saw something else entirely. They saw Groll cannons failing. They saw human ships untouched, gliding through the heart of the paralyzed fleet. Sharma had not just hacked their ledger, she had subverted it, adding her own data streams. Crisp, clear overlays appeared on the public feed, showing the Groll energy feedback loop in real time. It was an undeniable public lesson in catastrophic design failure. You built a hammer, and we showed you the nail. On the bridge of the indomitable Will Overlord, Kalen stared in disbelief as his mighty fleet was neutered without a single shot fired against it. Red lights flashed on every console. His officers shouted reports of cascading overloads and system-wide shutdowns. His trap had not just failed, it had consumed his own fleet. The ultimate humiliation was the honor ledger itself, his personal stage now displaying his own impotence for his entire civilization to witness. His roar of fury was lost in the cacophony of his own failure. Commander Jax's vanguard flew through the paralyzed Groll fleet as if on parade. He had been the lure, the bait in a trap, far grander than he had imagined. His voice came over the comm, stripped of its usual bravado, replaced with sheer awe. "Admiral, they are dead in the water. Every ship that powered its main weapons is offline." He was flying through a graveyard of dark, helpless warships. "Maintain your course." Commander Rostova's voice answered calm and steady. "Our objective is not destruction." The vanguard passed the Groll flagship, its massive cannons cold and silent. They didn't fire. They didn't need to. The point had been made, the lesson delivered in a language of public shame that a pride-based culture like the Groll could not ignore. The empty throne is the loudest sermon. Now came the pivot. The Groll fleet was crippled, but not destroyed. The ultimatum, while now unenforceable, was still technically active. Rostova had to transition from strategic victory to diplomatic resolution. She had exposed the flaw in their doctrine. Now she had to offer them a way to abandon it without shattering their entire social structure. Mercy had to have teeth, but it also had to offer a path forward. Lyceum assessed the Groll fleet's capacity for retreat, she ordered. Identify the ships with the least system damage, those capable of assisting their more disabled counterparts. The AI's analysis was immediate. Approximately 63% of the Groll fleet retains primary engine and life support function, Admiral. The weapon and advanced sensor suites are universally offline. They are for all practical purposes a salvage convoy, not a battle fleet. Open a hailing frequency to the Indomitable Will, Rostova commanded. Patch Overlord Kalen through to the main screen. A tense moment passed before the connection was accepted. Kalen's face appeared no longer the picture of arrogant authority, but a portrait of simmering, impotent rage. His bridge behind him was dark, lit only by the hellish red glow of emergency lighting. He said nothing, waiting for the human admiral to gloat to issue her own demands. Rostova met his gaze without malice. Overlord Kalen, she began, her voice respectful but firm. You came to Viridian to enforce an ultimatum. That ultimatum and the doctrine behind it have failed. Your fleet is crippled, your communications are compromised, and your honor ledger has shown the truth of this encounter to your people. She let the words sink in. This is the consequence of a strategy that offers only submission or destruction. It leaves no room for anything else, and so it breaks when faced with a third option. She continued, We are not here to destroy your fleet or your people. We are here to establish a precedent. The age of ultimatums in this sector is over. The ledger is balanced. What do you want, human? Kalen growled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I am offering you a choice, Rostova said. One that your doctrine never allows. Not submission, not destruction, but withdrawal. You may collect your ships and leave the Viridian system. We will not fire upon you. We will in fact provide you with the necessary technical data to safely restart your core systems. Your crews do not need to suffer for the flaws in your philosophy. This was the crux of it, a demonstration of mercy that simultaneously reinforced her position of absolute strength. Kalen was stunned into silence. He had expected demands for territory, for resources for a formal surrender. He was being offered a dignified retreat, an escape from a trap of his own making. To a warrior culture like the Groll, it was both an incredible mercy and a final crushing lesson in the human way of thinking. They had defeated his fleet, shamed him publicly, and were now offering to help him pick up the pieces. It was a complete conceptual demolition of his worldview. Why he finally managed to ask the single word, heavy with confusion. Because the goal is not to create an enemy, Rostova said simply. It is to end a flawed practice. A lesson is only useful if the student survives to understand it. She leaned forward slightly. You have 72 hours to withdraw your fleet, Overlord. The same amount of time you gave Viridian. The choice is yours. The screen went blank. We teach, we do not conquer. Aboard the Reckoning, the bridge crew worked to transition from combat readiness to a state of watchful assistance. Data packets containing the Groll system reboot sequences were compiled by Lyceum and transmitted on a broad open channel. It was a final audacious act of instruction. Rostova watched the Groll fleet waiting for their response. For a long hour, nothing happened. The dark ships floated silent and wounded. Jax paced nervously. He could be planning something, Admiral. A final desperate act. He is not planning, Commander Rostova corrected gently. He is learning. A difficult and painful lesson. Then slowly, one of the Groll cruisers began to move. Its engines came online, sputtering at first, then stabilizing. It moved not toward the human fleet, but toward one of its more heavily damaged brethren. A tractor beam normally used to haul asteroids or cargo extended gently, taking the disabled ship in tow. Another followed suit, and then another. The Groll fleet under Kalen's silent command was transforming itself from an armada of conquest into a rescue operation. They had accepted the terms. They were going home. The cost of this victory had been minimal in blood, but tangible nonetheless. The Starlight Drift was in space dock at Viridian Prime, its hull being repaired, its wounded crewmen recovering. The Ninth Fleet's energy reserves were severely depleted from the massive EWW output, requiring a week of downtime to recharge. Rostova had also expended a significant amount of political capital. The logs of this engagement would be scrutinized for years. But the precedent had been set. Anchor the precedent in mercy, and it will hold against the tides of war. As the last Gruul ship towed by another prepared to enter hyperspace, a final message arrived from the indomitable Will. It was not from Kalen. It was a simple encrypted data packet. Sharma decrypted it and looked up at Rostova, her expression unreadable. "Admiral, it's a complete copy of the Gruul honor ledger for this engagement, with a new final entry logged by Overlord Kalen himself." She displayed it on the main screen. Next to the final tally of the Viridian siege, a single line of Gruul text had been added. Lyceum provided the translation. The debt was called. The ledger was balanced by a lesson, not a blow. A new account is opened. It was an admission, an acknowledgement, perhaps even the beginning of understanding. The Gruul had learned that an ultimatum was a weapon that could be turned against its wielder. They had learned that there were other currencies besides honor and destruction. Humanity had taught them about accountability. Rostova watched the last of the Gruul fleet vanish into the star-dusted blackness. The crimson overlay of the blockade on the hololith dissolved, leaving the Viridian system clean and bright. The timer which had been frozen disappeared entirely. The crisis was over. The victory was absolute precisely because it was bloodless. The public ledgers of the Terran Federation would record the event not as a battle, but as the Viridian correction. The Gruul hegemony's policy of ultimatum-based diplomacy was officially rescinded by their own high command within the cycle. Its failure too public, too complete to ignore. The bridge of the reckoning was quiet, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly giving way to a profound sense of accomplishment. The soft blue light of the hololith reflected on Rostova's face as she looked out at the stars, at the peaceful system she had protected. Her methods were unorthodox, her belief in teaching rather than conquering a point of contention among her more hawkish peers. But here today, her philosophy had been vindicated in the most undeniable way. The mirror she had held up to the Gruul had shown them a truth they could not unsee. The lights on the Viridian orbital stations burned brighter now, a silent, glittering tally of lives, saved not by breaking the enemy, but by showing them how to mend. Wisdom is not a weapon to be wielded, but a light to be shared, she said. Her voice a quiet reflection in the calm of the bridge. We offer it freely, but if they refuse the lesson, we will ensure they pay the tuition, for the ledger always balances in the end. It is the one truth that binds us all from the smallest colony to the greatest hegemony. The math is inescapable. The universe does not bargain, it accounts. The quiet hum of the bridge was a fragile peace, a held breath after a storm. Commander Jax watched the last of the Gruul hyperspace signatures fade, a sense of profound victory settling over him. They had won. They had done it without a war, without a massacre. Yet Admiral Rostova's posture remained unchanged. She stood before the hololith of the now liberated Viridian system, her expression not triumphant, but deeply contemplative. The war was over, but the accounting, it seemed, was not. Lyceum, she said, her voice soft in the quiet bridge. Analyze the final transmission from Overlord Kalen. Cross-reference the phrase, a new account is opened, with all known Gruul idioms and diplomatic protocols. I do not believe that was a poetic flourish. Analysis in progress. Admiral the AI responded. Initial probability matrix suggests the phrase deviates from standard Groll post-conflict terminology by a margin of 98.7%. It does not correlate with a threat, a surrender, or a request for reparations. It is an anomaly. Anomaly. The word hung in the air, a dissonant note in their symphony of victory. The hull of the Reckoning vibrated with the low thrum of its recharged capacitors, a steady, reassuring heartbeat in the deep black. A new mystery. Rostova felt it in her bones. Kalen's final message was not an end. It was a preface. The page has turned, but the book is not closed. Sub-Commander Sharma looked up from her console, a frown creasing her brow. Admiral, I'm picking up residual energy traces from the Groll fleet's wake. They aren't standard hyperspace exit vectors. They're damaged. Leaking radiation consistent with weapon impacts. But the energy signature is unlike anything in our database. It's not human, and it's not Groll. Jax stepped forward. Impossible. We were the only other combatant here. They never fired a shot at us, and we only disabled their systems. The damage is old, Sharma clarified, zooming in on the energy spectrum analysis. It pulsed on the screen, a sickly green-violet light. Weeks old, at least. Whatever hit them, it happened long before they arrived at Viridian. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture far more disturbing than a simple blockade. The Groll's aggression. Their rigid, desperate doctrine. What if it wasn't born of arrogance, but of fear? What if they weren't conquerors, but refugees, running from something so terrible they were willing to burn out any world that stood in their way just to find a safe harbor? The ultimatum doctrine wasn't a tool of conquest. It was a shield designed to brutally and efficiently clear a path through a hostile universe. A brace against a storm we could not see. As if summoned by their discovery, a priority alert flashed. It was a message from Kalen, broadcast on a tightly encrypted directional beam aimed directly at the Reckoning. His face appeared on the screen again, but the rage was gone, replaced by a deep, soul-crushing weariness. His armor was scarred. The bridge behind him was a scene of frantic repair. Admiral Rostova, he began, his voice rough. I do not have time for pleasantries. My new account was not a metaphor. It was a warning. My people are not the monsters you believe us to be. We are the survivors. He signaled to an aide, and a new window opened beside his face. It was sensor data fragmented and chaotic, showing a Groll flotilla being consumed. Not blown apart by torpedoes, but swarmed by a crystalline insectoid fleet that seemed to phase in and out of reality, latching onto their hulls and draining them of energy until they were nothing but cold, dead husks. They are called the Chimeric Swarm, Kalen said, his voice grim. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They do not conquer. They harvest. They are drawn to stellar energy, and your star is a banquet. We came to Viridian not to take it, but to fortify it, to create a firebreak. Our ultimatum was a crude tool, but it was the only one we had left. This was the reveal, the terrible truth behind the Groll's brutality. They were not the aggressors. They were the first wall against a flood. The true enemy is the one you never knew existed. Lyceum's synthesized voice cut through the stunned silence on the bridge. Admiral long-range sensors are detecting a massive energy surge at the edge of the Viridian system. The signature matches the Groll data. The Chimeric Swarm has arrived. The hololith updated a swarm of iridescent knife-like signatures, pouring into the system like a shattered rainbow. They moved with a chilling unified purpose, a tide of silent death heading directly for Viridian Prime and its sun. The stakes had just escalated from 30 million lives to the survival of the entire system. He wasn't lying, Jax whispered, his face pale. All the aggression, all the tactical calculations they had made had been based on a false premise. They had outmaneuvered a wounded animal, not a predator. Rostova's mind raced. Her entire philosophy was built on teaching on finding a third option, beyond submission or destruction. But how do you teach a tidal wave? How do you balance a ledger with an entity that only subtracts? Her conflict triangle, her morality, Lyceum's logic, the enemy's doctrine had just been shattered. The swarm had no doctrine. It was a force of nature. Anya. What are their vectors? What are their speeds? Rostova's voice was sharp, pulling the bridge crew from their shock. They're ignoring us, Admiral Sharma reported. Her voice strained. And the Groll remnants. They're moving directly toward the planet. Standard attack patterns are irrelevant. They flow like a fluid. A civilian vignette from the orbital station Viridian Sky played out in a panicked burst of communication. A traffic controller, a young man named Reese, watched in horror as his screen filled with the approaching swarm. Mayday, Mayday, this is Viridian Sky Traffic Control. We have unidentified contacts inbound, massive numbers. They're not responding to hails. They are. Oh gods, they're beautiful, and they're going to kill us all. His transmission was cut off by a wave of static as the first tendrils of the swarm began to drain the station's power. We cannot teach the storm. We must become the shore. Lyceum, full analysis of the swarm's energy absorption method, Rostova commanded. Find me a vulnerability. Jax recalled the fleet to defensive positions around Viridian Prime, all non-essential personnel to brace for impact. She turned back to the screen where Kalen still waited. Overlord, your fleet is damaged, but you know this enemy. Will you fight with us? Kalen's weary eyes met hers. For a moment, the pride of his people, the shame of his defeat, warred within him. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. We sought a fortress. We found an ally. The Groll will hold the line with you, Admiral. It is a better death than being consumed in the dark. The transmission ended. Kalen had a fleet to rally. The Bridge of the Reckoning was once again a hub of focused energy, but this time, it was not the quiet tension of a strategic gambit. It was the frantic, desperate hum of a fight for survival. The scent of ozone was thick in the recycled air as power was shunted to shields and weapon systems. The deck plates vibrated with the deep, resonant thrum of the main drive, holding them in a hard burn. Admiral, the swarm exhibits a collective energy field. Lyceum reported its voice a stark contrast to the rising tension. Individual entities are weak, but the whole acts as a single circuit. They are draining energy directly from the planet's magnetosphere and orbital platforms. Can we disrupt the field? Rostova asked. A sustained high-energy barrage could create a feedback loop, but our fleet's power is insufficient to cover the necessary area, Lyceum stated. The probability of success is 12.3%. It was a death sentence. They could fight, they could die, but they could not win. Not with guns, not with missiles. Rostova's gaze drifted from the tactical display to the brilliant blue-white star at the heart of the system. The swarm was drawn to stellar energy. It was their food, their motivation. Her mind flashed back to the mirror lattice, the tool of deception she had used against the Groll. A tool that bent light. A tool that managed energy. What if they didn't need to create the energy themselves? What if they could borrow it? The sun itself will be our weapon. A radical, desperate plan began to form in her mind, a strategy so audacious it bordered on madness. It was not a plan of destruction, but of denial. A final grand lesson written not in data, but in starfire. "Lyceum," she said, her voice dropping, filled with a terrifying new resolve. "Forget the fleet's power output. Calculate the total energy potential of the Viridian star, and tell me how large a mirror would we need to build to focus even a fraction of its power into a coherent beam." The AI was silent for a full 5 seconds, a digital eternity. The sheer scale of the request was staggering. Then, new calculations began to scroll across the main screen schematics of a lattice 1,000 times larger than the one they had deployed, before a structure that would span 1,000,000 kilometers of space. The construction of such a grand lattice would require the total manufacturing capacity of Viridian Prime and the combined resources of our fleet. Lyceum stated its voice devoid of emotion. The estimated time to completion under optimal conditions is 3 weeks. "We have hours," Jax cut in his face, grim, as he watched the swarm begin to feast on the planetary shields. "Then we will need help," Rostova said. She opened a system-wide channel, her voice broadcasting to the 30 million souls on the planet below, to the battered Groll fleet, and to her own crew. "This is Admiral Rostova. We face an enemy we cannot defeat with guns, but we are not defenseless. We have ingenuity, we have will, and we have a star. Viridian, we need your factories. Overlord. Kalen, we need your heavy lifters. Ninth Fleet, we need your engineers. We are going to build a wall of light. We are going to teach this monster the meaning of fire. Hold the darkness at bay." A strange and powerful hope surged through the system. On Viridian Prime, factories that hours ago were building consumer goods were repurposed, their assembly lines churning out the simple hexagonal drone frames that would form the backbone of the grand lattice. Civilian pilots in rugged cargo haulers volunteered to fly them into position, their small ships darting between the sleek human warships and the brutish, damaged Groll cruisers. It was a scene of impossible unity, a testament to the power of a shared existential threat. Kalen's fleet, a force of conquest, now turned to salvation, formed the outer defensive perimeter. They and Jax's vanguard met the swarm head-on, not to defeat it, but to delay it. To buy time. Groll plasma cannons designed to shatter armored hulls flared alongside human kinetic batteries. The swarm barely seemed to notice its crystalline bodies absorbing the impacts. Their advance slowed, but not stopped. The cost was immediate and brutal. A Groll destroyer, its engines failing, was swarmed. Its lights flickered and died, its crew lost in silence. A human frigate, the Steadfast, took heavy damage, defending a convoy of civilian construction ships. Its port nacelle sheared away its crew, fighting fires and sealing hull breaches. Rostova watched the casualties mount on the tactical display, each red icon a fresh debt on a ledger she could never hope to balance. The cost of victory was being paid in real time in blood and steel. Lyceum's voice was a constant presence, coolly reporting the mounting losses and the agonizingly slow progress of the lattice construction. Lattice at 17% completion. Groll cruiser. Stonefist has been compromised. Swarm has breached the outer defense perimeter. The plan was a race against time, a desperate gamble on a cosmic scale. The swarm was a relentless tide, and their wall was only half built. The console in front of Rostova showed a heat shimmer from the overworked EW emitters, a constant reminder of the strain on her ship, on her fleet. Her own heartbeat, monitored by her suit, was a steady rhythm against the chaos, an anchor of calm in the raging storm. "They're breaking through faster than we calculated," Admiral Jax reported. His voice strained over the comm, the sounds of battle raging behind him. The Stone Fist sacrifice only bought us 90 seconds. We can't hold them much longer. We don't need you to hold them forever, Commander Rostova replied, her eyes fixed on the schematic of the Grand Lattice. It was a beautiful, terrible thing, a web of hope spun in the face of oblivion. We just need you to hold them long enough. Sharma is the primary focusing matrix in place. Affirmative. Admiral Sharma's station was a blur of motion. The central drones are aligned. We are ready to… well, we're ready to throw the switch and pray the system doesn't tear itself apart. The moment was at hand. The lattice was a skeletal ghost of what it was supposed to be barely 40% complete. But it was all they had. It had to be enough. All ships, Rostova broadcast her voice ringing with command. Fall back to the lattice. All civilian craft clear the area. Now! The Allied fleet disengaged a battered and bruised collection of survivors, pulling back behind the shimmering, half-formed web of drones. The swarm, relentless and unthinking, surged after them, drawn into the designated focal point. It was a kill box, but not one of their making. This one was powered by a star. Lyceum Rostova set her hand, hovering over the master control. Let's settle this account. Open the gates of dawn. The command was absolute. Across 1,000,000 kilometers of space, tens of thousands of drones and repurposed cargo ships pivoted their mirrored surfaces in perfect silent unison. They were no longer individual objects, but a single immense, light-hungry organism. They caught the brilliant raw energy of the Viridian star and focused it. For a fraction of a second, a new, brighter sun was born in the darkness of the system, a blinding lance of pure, concentrated daylight aimed directly at the heart of the chimeric swarm. There was no sound, only an overwhelming, impossible light. The swarm, a creature of energy, was suddenly faced with more of it than it could ever hope to consume. Its collective energy field, its greatest strength, became its undoing. The focused solar radiation overloaded their network in a chain reaction of catastrophic silent detonations. Crystalline bodies that had shrugged off plasma cannons and kinetic slugs were vaporized, turned back into the base energy they craved. The tide of the swarm was not just stopped, it was unmade. The beam of light a testament to the combined will of 2 species and a world held for 10 agonizing seconds. On the bridge of the reckoning, every screen went white, every sensor overloaded by the sheer magnitude of the event. The ship groaned under the strain of the energy wash, and the air filled with the sharp, clean smell of superheated metal and burnt ozone. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The lattice drones, their mirrored surfaces scorched and pitted, broke formation. The light faded, and where the chimeric swarm had been, there was nothing. Just empty space, shimmering with residual heat. The silence that followed was more profound than the noise of any battle. They had done it. They had held the line. They had turned the heart of their system into a shield and a sword. The cost had been grievous. 3 human ships and 7 Groll vessels were critically damaged. The Steadfast was a floating wreck its crew saved, but the ship a total loss. The Groll had lost nearly 1/5 of their remaining force. But Viridian was safe. The survivors were alive. It was a victory measured not in kills, but in the silence where 1 billion alien screams should have been. A tally paid in courage. The Allied fleet, a strange and wonderful collection of sleek Terran designs and brutalist Groll engineering, drifted in the silence. On the public channels, a hesitant cheer from Viridian Prime grew into a roar of joyous celebration. They had faced extinction and had turned it back. The massive mirror arrays of the Grand Lattice, their purpose served no longer blazed with stellar fire. They slowly cooled their incandescent surfaces, dimming to a dull pewter gray against the infinite backdrop of the stars. Rostova stood on her bridge, watching the last of the heat signatures fade. Her people were alive. The Groll, once her antagonists, were now her battered allies, their survival intertwined with her own. She had held to her ethos not just to teach, but to learn. The Groll had taught her that not every enemy was driven by malice, and the Swarm had taught her that some truths are not learned, but endured. The ledger of the universe was a far more complex document than she had ever imagined. Its debts and payments recorded not just between fleets, but between existence and oblivion. They had not just won a battle, they had balanced an existential account. Survival is the final ledger,